So guys, so nice to meet you. It's kind of awkward coming to you from my home. And everybody is in their home where I would much rather be in front of all of you to have a conversation with each and every one of you face to face. There's something magical about being in the room with somebody and being able to just interact freely with that individual. Um, Welcome to my house. This is my backyard. I was telling Pat before we started that this is my safe place. So I'm in a really good place, and I'm coming off of a very long day of work, of several meetings and a lot of fundraising. Um, but just wanted to give you an update on the campaign. If we have not had the pleasure to meet, I want to thank Kurt and Pat for being so gracious and having me over, and I want to thank Lynzee for making time to moderate tonight's event. I am Michelle de la Isla, and I do hope to become your next Congresswoman. I am not perfect. I am not a savior. I am not going to come and promise you that I'm going to go into Washington and I'm going to fix things tomorrow, because that would be extremely naive, and that would be a lack of understanding of how the system really works. My desire is to get to Washington and be one of 435 people that are making decisions on your behalf. But most importantly, a person that is out there lifting your voice. I am pretty middle of the road, if you want to call it that, because I look at things not as Democrat or Republican. I look at things with regards to the issues that people are concerned about and the things that we talk about on our kitchen table. And when I've talked to people across the district, and I've had the privilege of talking to people north, south, and center of the district already, the concerns that I hear are the same. I hear concerns about health access. I hear concerns about infrastructure not being sufficient. I'm hearing concerns about hospitals closing. If memory serves me right, I think the Leavenworth just announced that there's a hospital closing there, which would be the fourth hospital closing in this district. Fourth hospital closing. That more than likely would have never closed had we had Medicaid expansion, Medicaid expansion. And in a nation that is the richest in the world, we still are struggling with providing proper access to healthcare to our residents. And the repercussions of this are being felt by hospitals that are offering to pay the 10% that the state would have to come up with in order for us to have expansion. But our state is choosing, not all of it, everybody in our state, but there is still individuals choosing not to support the expansion of Medicaid. Those are the things that I'm hearing. I'm hearing about kids wanting to get good education and not being able to access broadband. And when you think about those issues, those are not Democratic or Republican issues. Those are issues of humans trying to make sure that we can be the best that we can possibly be, so that we can then in turn contribute back to our communities. I keep hearing about our farmers. Just like, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was sharing with me how cattle, she knew somebody that was selling a head of cattle for $100 because it was much more expensive, that the cattle had reached the ton mark and they were not able to sell the cattle. So now this asset had become a liability because they had to feed the cattle. So they are trying to sell this cattle at a pretty much giveaway cost, all because of policies that are happening at the federal level, because we have individuals in office that don't understand that we're not the subject matter expert, that don't understand that in order for us to support policies, we need to talk back to the individuals that are going to be impacted by them, so that we can lift up their voices, because they are the ones that understand what needs to happen. I am tired of the division in our state. I am tired of the division in our nation. And I am looking forward to a day in which we remember, first and foremost, that we are Kansans. I am concerned with great concern of the numbers of COVID-19 increases in our state and even in my community. We have gone from last week 174 cases to 281 today. Yesterday, before we had some people that were better, we had 293 cases. That's a significant increase. And all because our national government has decided to politicize something as simple as a mask and the care for a virus that is deadly, that has reached 3,000 cases in our nation. So I would love to be able to hear your concerns. I am not really big about talking at people. I'm great at being able to have conversations. So what I hope that tonight is It's more than anything a conversation in which we are able to just talk, and you're able to ask any question that you want of me, and that we could just, just talk. So I'm just gonna stop, and just see what questions you all have.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for those remarks, Michelle. And thank you to our viewers for sending in some great questions for us this evening. So, as you just mentioned, we're in an unprecedented time with this international pandemic, and it's created a lot of uncertainty in our communities. So, let's start with a few questions on how you are navigating this as a community leader. So, first, how are you handling the safety issues of campaigning during the pandemic?
So we are, as a team, committed not to interacting with anybody else. I have a very small team of people. My call time manager and my finance director and I are committed to not interacting with anybody else so that we can still do work face to face. We are trying to fundraise like gangbusters so that we can reach people through media. I'm excited about the fact that we have a core of volunteers that are doing amazing with calling people and canvassing people via phone, which is going to be something that we're going to have to do. And we are trying to figure out how do we reach people via mail. We're trying to figure out how we use Facebook, our website, and how we utilize social media and paid advertising in order for us to reach the people that we need to reach. This is going to have to be a really complex campaign. That is something that we've not had to deal with ever, because we won't be able to go door to door, which means that we're going to have to multiply our efforts of people reaching out to individuals and making a personal appeal, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, so that we can get people engaged to turn out to vote. And then the other thing that we're doing is advocating for mail-in voting. It is so important that everybody uses their voice to advocate that we should not compromise our health in order for us to exercise our civic right.
Great. So, unfortunately, even if the campaign comes to an end and we have the election day, COVID will still possibly be an issue that we have to um, focus on. So, what would be some priorities as a congressperson for COVID-19 relief when you get there?
So one of the things that I keep hearing, especially in our Black communities and in our underprivileged communities, is lack of access to testing. If we really want to box this virus in, we know that there's four things that we need to do. We need to have testing capacity. We need to have public health capacity. We need to have resources for those individuals that don't have access to leave their home or feed their families while they're in the process of quarantine. And we need to be able to have the public health capacity to also follow up on people once we find out that you were infected, so that you can follow up and figure out who are the other individuals who became infected as well. But if we're not testing, we don't know the reality of how much cases we have and how we can actually manage this crisis. So one of the things that I would be very interested in is ensuring, A, that we have the proper amount of testing and that we have availability for free testing for individuals. Right now in Shawnee County, I don't know what's happening in Douglas County. The way that is stipulated, we need to have individuals with symptoms in order for them to get testing. But if you were exposed and you want to know and you want to be able to quarantine yourself adequately, you should be able to get access to a test. The other thing that I'm concerned about is access to PPE. When this all started, the reason that everybody was asked to stay at home was because there was not enough PPE to go around. We didn't have enough N95s. We did not have enough gowns. We certainly did not have enough of everything of sanitizer was really in low demand. I mean, even sanitizing things that you would need for your home were not available. So we need to ensure that we figure out a system that we could provide those things, especially as we're thinking school coming up in August, how we're going to ensure that we have that demand. And then the other thing that I'm very concerned about is the fact that hospitals, just like many businesses in our communities, struggle significantly with being able to keep up with the pace of staff. So many of our hospitals ended up surviving only on 50% of the revenues and had to do some major significant cuts of staff in order for them to be able to live through the pandemic situation because they didn't have enough to go around. We cannot let that happen because our hospitals need to have everything that they need to provide proper care in our communities. So we need to figure out a way of fortifying our hospitals at the same time as we keep moving forward. So those are just some of the things that I'm concerned about as we continue living with the virus, especially after today. I don't know if you all saw that there was an article that there's some research showing that the antibodies that we have in our system in a certain percentage of the population only survives for a few weeks after exposure, which is extremely concerning because it means that this may be a very complex situation for the long run. So there's more to learn. We need to lean on science, and we need to figure out how to unify from the federal level to the local level, start sharing to people that wearing a mask and taking care of each other is the kindest thing that we could do so that there's not so much division.
Great. So another major issue that the US and Kansas is grappling with right now are the racial injustices brought by the murder of George Floyd. So our viewers tonight are curious to know more about your thoughts and action that you're willing to take as a congresswoman to achieve more racial equality and equity. So what
So
will be your first, oh, sorry. What are going to be your first steps to address racial injustice in Douglas County? And please give us some examples of what you would bring to the table that would have an immediate effect on these current issues.
So one of the things that I don't know if anybody is adept to torture and likes to watch city council meetings, um, but on the last council meeting, we were very purposeful and had a 2-hour conversation of the things that we have done in the last 2 years in Shawnee County. So I'll speak about that so that that gives you an example of my commitment to ensuring that we have equity and justice, especially when it comes to the treatment of our Black brothers and sisters. And not only our Black brothers and sisters, but our Native American brothers and sisters and our Hispanic brothers and sisters that are also struggling with the same issues. In the city of Topeka, the 8 can't wait requests are already something that we do. And we are going to next week talk about the chokeholds becoming policy in our community. But Chief and I are having a further conversation of talking about how do we come up with a policy that is Topeka couldn't wait, to show that the 8 things that is being advocated about of using continuum of force, not shooting at vehicles, eliminating the no-knock warrants, and all these things are not happening in our community. With regards to defunding the police, I often tell people that it's a really bad advertising name because the call for defunding the police is really not to defund the police. And when we have names like this, what it does, it creates more division. There is nobody that is more supportive of our law enforcement officers or good law enforcement officers than me. I have great relationships with our chief of police, and we all agree. Police officers shouldn't have to be responding to a dispute between 2 neighbors. Police officers shouldn't have to be responding without the tools and the resources to calls that have to do with mental health conditions. And of course, they shouldn't have to show up dressed up in significant garb to intimidate individuals if that is a mental health call. So what we have done in our community, and I cannot take credit for this is all Chief Cochran, he came up with the CIT program. Our officers undergo 40 hours of training of community intervention so that they have a partnership with Vallejo, which is our community health, mental health organization, to go alongside our officers. And we have a Vallejo case manager that is able to support us when we have calls of this nature. In addition to that, one of the things that we're doing is that we're coming up with a program that is going to incite neighbors to take care of each other and help mitigate crime before it actually starts happening. We're investing a lot of dollars in that. We really have not been investing a ton of dollars in the militarization of our police department, which is one of the big concerns that you hear about defunding the police. And then furthermore, for the last 2 years, we've been part of the Department of Justice. We were the second in the nation doing strengthening police and community relations, in which our police officers in our community is having crucial conversations with our communities to understand where the lack of communication and the lack of trust is so that we can start walking forward. Now, hear me out when I say that although I am extremely proud of all the work that we've been doing in Topeka, it is not enough because the perception of many of our individuals in our community who are minorities and socioeconomically disadvantaged, in addition to the realities of some cases of officers that are still not getting the importance of having cultural competency and not profiling individuals is still happening. We are still working towards eliminating that by policy. One thing that I like to remind people is that we can work on changing all the policies that we want, but if we don't do the hard work of changing hearts, we're not going to get anywhere. So at least in the policy section, we're doing a lot of work.
So our next set of questions will be more general, yet just as important for our viewers to learn more about your political ambitions and stances in regard to Kansas communities. So could you describe what contacts you're making in the rural areas of our district?
So one of the things that I was the proudest of is that Steve Lopes and I and my campaign chair, Nicole, ended up doing a Southeast Kansas tour. And we've been in Douglas County more than once. And this is, I think like the fifth thing that we do, six. I don't know what number it is with Douglas County. We have a chair in Atchison, which is Ryan Pickman. We're talking with Sherry Grogan and Leavenworth. So we have been, before COVID, we had already hit 12 of our 25 counties because our commitment was to have a 25 county race. And that is extremely important to me because just because a county is not going to turn out significant numbers to make us win the race, it doesn't mean that our citizens and our individuals, our residents are not important. I'll give you a great example of how committed I am to talking across boundaries. Lynn County sent us what I would consider a somewhat controversial questionnaire with regards to what our stances are. And one of the questions was, what was our stance on Shia law, which was a Sharia law? And we were like, oh, wow, that's like an interesting question. But here was my stance. My stance was, I wasn't concerned about whether we were going to be told that we should or should not answer that questionnaire. My concern was the fact that those are individuals that live in this district, that even though I may not have similar values and stances as they do in some of these questions, they deserve to understand where I stand on these issues. So we submitted that questionnaire, or at least we tried to submit that questionnaire. And we want to be accessible and transparent to everybody. So that has been our reach right now. And we are right now doing phone banking all across the district. So we'll figure out of making this a 25 county race and reaching out everybody in the district, because this is very important to me.
Great. So how will you collaborate with Republicans to make Kansas better for everyone?
I think that if you look at what's happening at a national level, you start learning that I think that there's a lot of Republicans that are feeling like their party has left them. I think that, by and large, the values of Kansas are not values of yelling at each other and using social media to be mean to each other. Now, are we seeing some of that happening? Yes. When you really look in your social media feeds, it's not a vast majority of people. We always have the same group of offenders, right? By and large, Kansans are progressive, kind, thoughtful, middle of the ground, and very practical individuals. And what they are seeing is that issues that matter to them, as their children having access to healthcare, our farmers having access to continue moving our economy, and making sure that we have the proper infrastructure and education, are things that span way further than just a Democrat agenda. There's two big issues that are concerning in the Republican Party, which is the right to choose and the Second Amendment rights. And when I sat down and had one-on-one conversations with many Republicans, the conversations have been very interesting because I tell people, hey, here is my personal story of me having the right to choose. I've had very complicated pregnancies. I have lupus. And my pregnancies all were not easy. I mean, my oldest daughter, I had fatty liver in pregnancy, and I was offered a chance to terminate pregnancy because it could have cost my life. But I chose to have my child. And then my youngest daughter was 8 weeks premature. Very difficult pregnancies. And even my son, I was only 19 when I ended up pregnant with my son, and I was homeless. And I had a choice. My mom offered me money to terminate my pregnancy, but I chose not to terminate my pregnancy. And when you start talking from your own values and you start talking to individuals that just because you want to have a woman have the ability to make a choice with their doctor with regards to what to do, and that there is no politician that should be involved in that decision, the conversation really shifts. And I think that when we're willing to be that vulnerable and have these deep level conversations, or like with the Second Amendment situation, there's this narrative that Democrats want to take away your guns. And when I tell people, I don't want to take away your gun. I want to make sure that people that are not supposed to have them don't have them. And I want to make sure that if you're going to have a gun, the same way that I had to get a license to drive a car, that you are insured a person that is, capable and responsible to have your firearm, so that then other people don't give you a bad rep. What you end up finding is that people are really taken aback, because it's really easy to try to make things black and white when nothing is black and white. Everything is complicated and it's got several shades of gray that we have to respect. So when I speak with Republicans, I am extremely open when it comes to issues that may not be very popular, because I speak from my own personal experience. And it doesn't mean that we may end up a conversation agreeing, but the important thing is that we end up a conversation by respecting each other and understanding that, hey, guess what? It's okay to disagree. And nobody is going to 100% agree with your stances. And if they do, either you have a person that, has a life and background that is very similar to yours, or they're lying. So I'm not here to lie to you. And my only game is that I have no game. So that's how I broach those conversations. And so far, knock on wood, it's been pretty pleasant.
Wonderful. So what would be your top 5 priorities once you do get into Congress?
Easy. Healthcare, 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 healthcare. Um, no, but on a serious note, healthcare number one, access not only to healthcare, but negotiating power to prescription medications. The other thing that I'm concerned about is infrastructure. And infrastructure does not just mean our roads. If we want our rural communities to be able to thrive, we need to make sure that there's access to them. But in addition to that, we need to have access to broadband. It's no longer a luxury. And in order for us to have access to healthcare and good education, especially now in the time of COVID, our kids need to have broadband and our families need to have access to it. Our farmers are a huge concern to me. I want to make sure that our farmers are able to have the support that they need, in order for them to thrive economically, not only because they're feeding us, but because they're feeding the globe. And then the other one that matters to me, and I cannot give a ranking on each of these, but it's education. If we want to have thriving communities, we need to ensure that our residents in this state and in this nation are able to not only be healthy, but are able to have all of the opportunities so that then they can make a choice on how they want to give their talents back to the world. And then if they can't because they have a disability, then we have good insurance treatment, insurance access so that people can take care of themselves. And then we have strong systems. But those are my priorities when I get to Congress.
So speaking of the importance of education, what is your opinion about the administration's decision to eliminate student visas for our international students that must take online classes in the fall semester?
That is heartbreaking because you have many individuals whose families are struggling, and we don't know the conditions that we're sending those students back to. And not only that, these are students that are part of the fabrics of our community. It's extremely heartbreaking for me. If they're paying their tuition, they're going to need to have access to those professors the same way that our students do. I tell you the example that we have in our own home. My daughter, my oldest daughter, thrived. I mean, she was extremely happy to do school online. However, my youngest daughter had a horrible time with it. She needed the one-on-one contact. So you're telling me that we have students that we're taking their dollars for them to get an education in this country, and we're going to tell them you need to go back home and you don't have access to your professors and one-on-one contact after we charge them 3 times more than what we charge a local student? That's extremely unfair.
So what would be some high priority policies for immigration that you're hoping to pursue while in Congress?
So the first thing is, of course, figuring out how we create a pathway for citizenship for our DACA students. These are individuals that have been here. They have known nothing else but this country, and yet we're still having debates of whether they should or not remain in this country. I think that's ludicrous. The other thing that we need to work on is we need to figure out a more humane way. I'm so thankful that the Supreme Court stated that the children that were in these detention centers had to go back to their families. that's inhumane. The treatment of those children was inhumane, and there has to be reform with regards to how we deal with families when they're crossing the border, especially when most of them are crossing the border because they're looking for a better future for their children, the same way that our forefathers did when they came into this country. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a believer that we shouldn't have safeguards in the border, but we often focus on the south border and we don't talk about the north border. We have two borders in this country. And if we're going to talk about safety, then let's really talk about safety, but let's not profile a group of individuals just because they're coming from the south. And then the other thing that we need to work on is on solid work programs so that families that are able to help our economy. One of our very own from Douglas County, Scotty Thelman, who's a farmer, was telling me the last time that he and I had the opportunity to talk before the virus that he was looking to get a visa because he was trying to hire people to work in the farm, and the individuals that he was hiring were not able to keep up with the pace of work. However, he knew that if he was able to bring in individuals, that there would be individuals that would be more than happy and would have that work ethic and practice to be able to do the work that he needed. So we need to figure out a way of making immigration policy that works in a humane way.
Another hot button topic is climate change. So what would be the most important climate policies that you're willing to work on in Congress that would help Kansas specifically?
So, for example, one of the things that has happened in Kansas is that we used to receive subsidies in order for us to build wind turbines. And I know that in certain parts of our district, that's a really interesting conversation because there's groups that want them and there's groups that don't. But for the areas that do want to have that expansion, Kansas is number 3 in the nation in regards to wind energy, and we have to capitalize on that. So, number one, how do we create more incentives so that individuals can start changing their portfolios and do research not only on solar to make it a little bit more inexpensive, but most importantly, to invest dollars into research that will help us store that renewable energy. One of the biggest problems that we have is that the sun is not shining all day and it's not windy all the time, right? So we need to have a mixed portfolio, but most importantly, we need to have a way to store that energy across the nation because our grid is connected. Another thing that I'm big on is making sure that we have programs that would allow for municipalities to start changing their fleets to electric vehicles and start talking about ways of incentivizing carbon reduction and recycling in a meaningful way that actually just starts yielding lower carbon emissions. And then after we've exhausted all of the carrots, I think that, it's time for us to start talking about a tax on carbon for those individuals that once we have a good portfolio for individuals to participate in. And I heard this really interesting group that was talking about having that tax go directly back to people instead of to the government. So there's a lot of great ideas out there. I'm looking forward to getting to Washington so that I can learn what's out there so that we can continue moving the needle because we need to have a planet. And our farmers cannot withstand another year of the horrid floods that we had last year.
And what would be an important women's issue that you're hoping to tackle in Congress as well?
VAWA. I think it's horrible that we have this horrid boyfriend loophole, and that people are unwilling because it would impact somebody's ability to have access to a firearm. That policy was disbanded. Violence Against Women Act should be re-ratified, and we should be able to have protection for women.
So for our final question tonight, we would like to end on a high note. What has been some positive experiences you've had while campaigning?
Oh my God, you guys. Seriously, I mean, just being able to just have contact with people from all walks of lives, from different experiences, and to learn from your experience, and more than anything, receive energy from all of you. I tell you, for me, running for mayor was a very different experience than it is to run for Congress. Running for mayor was all about not sleeping, door knocking, figuring out how many people we were going to touch, how many people we were going to get in touch with, and being able to listen to their voices and understand their issues so that now as mayor, I can do that work of advocacy. When you run for Congress, the first thing that you do is that you sit down and start making phone calls and raising money. And it's kind of lonely. It's very different than the contact that you're used to having as a mayor. And I get so much energy when I have these opportunities to get in touch with all of you and hear your questions and be able to, because from these questions, you're able to glean what is important to your people. And then if we would be face to face, guess what would happen? We would all be sitting with a little glass of sangria, and we would all afterwards just sit down and just have after conversations in which I would be able to listen to your concerns and understand where you're coming from. So the best thing of this campaign has been to expand my family by 25 different counties, 24 new counties that I just didn't know, that are filled with beautiful people that make me proud to be a Kansan.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for tuning in tonight with us, Michelle, and thank you to our viewers for attending this evening. Make sure to mark your calendars to vote on August 4th and November 3rd, and have a wonderful evening. If you have any more questions or would like to ask some follow-up questions to Michelle, please contact the Douglas County Dems at our website, douglascountydems.org.